Mariano will have the opportunity to go for a big squeeze as Trey raises to 600 in the cutoff. This is followed by Andrew Nemi picking up a playable hand with 2 Broadway cards and calling. Somehow, Mariano wakes up with a monster right on cue.
Kind of hard not to.
This much. I'm back, baby. I'm back.
I'm not sure what to make of Mariano's previous comments and now his subsequent 3-bet. He's been incredibly aggressive already, 3 and 4 betting pretty relentlessly. We've got what's ordinarily going to be the best hand with ace-queen in the big blind. We've got a big decision to make.
And wow, Mariano talks about blasting off and immediately looks down at pocket queens, 3 bets to $3,500, and Brad has a real one. Ace queen off, 4 bets to $8,000. The perfect spot here for Mariano has Brad crushed.
That's pretty nice.
Snap calls.
Mariano doesn't even seem to consider 5 betting, so it feels like he has a worse suited ace of some sort or medium to high pocket pair. Maybe some type of suited connector hand that he didn't want to fold for a 4-bet that wasn't much more. I've ruled out hands like aces, kings, ace-king, and I doubt he'll have queens very often because we've got removal to queens. The flop comes 10-10-8 with 2 clubs, small blind checks. This pot has gotten massive. I'm not going to have any 10s or 8s in my range, whereas the opponent will have some trips and some full house combos. I check back to hopefully see an ace or a club. The turn is the 10 of diamonds, and the small blind checks again. Now I'm thinking it's a lot more likely our opponent either has ace high like us or an underpair to the board. 8's full just got counterfeited. I put out a small bet of 4,000 to make it seem like I'm milking the opponent and just checked back aces or kings on the flop to be tricky. Mariano will almost never have aces or kings in his range, whereas we will. Because of that, I plan to potentially fire huge on the river and maybe even overbet shove. Mariano calls the 4,000. In my mind, he could have ace high, maybe the same hand as us, or a hand like jacks, or an underpair to 10s. The river is the ace of hearts, giving us the second best boat possible. Mariano checks. He's got to hate seeing that card. I love it. This is such a rare spot to be in that I actually have no idea what the best play is. I'm kind of in shock to have hit the river. I want to make sure that we squeeze out any extra bit of money that we can, but I don't envision the opponent being able to call anything if he has a worse hand than ours. Ultimately, I go with another tiny sizing of 4,000, which is a lot in real life, but it's very small relative to the pot. Mariano can't fold for that amount, even though it's almost never a bluff. He calls. He reasonably could have called for a good chunk more with pocket queens, but if he had pocket 9s, I'm not sure that he would have. I'm finally getting some good runouts. We win a pot that's almost $30,000. I'm up about $20,000 overall. Very little was going right for me on the previous trip here. That's changed for the most part today. Ideally, I'd like to have several easy folds right away so I can get a little more comfortable and see how the table plays. Fate has something different in store for me. After posting the big blind and the ante, I'm dealt my very first hand, and it's ace-queen offsuit. To make things more interesting, the player on my left is straddled to 40. Before anyone has a chance to make a decision, there's $90 in the pot. That's 6 times more than a 5-10 game, only 2 stairs away from us starts out with. My anxiety increases as the first player to act raises to 110. It's on me. I have a lot going on in my head right now. I know what I'm supposed to do, but this is the exact opposite way I was hoping to begin the session. I don't want to play a big pot out of position and get immediately stacked. I just have to pretend that this is a normal game and play my best. I reach for my stack, assemble some black and orange chips, then 3-bet to 380. Internally, I'm pleading with the poker gods to please just let me take this down pre-flop. I promise to never say jiggities again if you don't want me to. I'm shown no mercy. The hijack calls the 380. He's a very good player. Right off the bat, we're thrown into the wolves. The first hand I play has $830 in the middle pre-flop, and we're playing out of position. My heart is pounding through my chest. I'm completely regretting my decision to play this highest stakes. Then the dealer puts out ace queen 9 rainbow. We flop top 2 pair in the most stressful start to any session that I've ever had. I can breathe again. Perhaps the poker gods don't have it out for me after all. I'm contemplating the best way to extract the maximum value. I down bet to 240. This is a flop that, as you can see, is going to crush my 3-bet range. My opponent knows that. I don't want to give him a free card, but I don't want to scare him off when he could be drawing close to dead. He's getting great odds. Apparently, they're not good enough. The hijack immediately folds. It would have been amazing to get more value there, but I can't even explain how important it was for my mindset to sit down and have a pot push our direction right away. We dealt ace-queen once more, under the gun +1. Under the gun limps in. We need to make the limper pay. I raise to 25. The cutoff calls. Under the gun calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop, and it comes King Jack 10 rainbow. We flop the nuts. What's better is that under the gun leads for 25. I don't have much to be worried about. I call with plans to make a move on the turn. The cutoff folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the Jack of diamonds. The board pairing isn't ideal. Still, we probably have the best hand. The opponent isn't afraid. He bets 75. Despite no longer having the nuts, I stick with my initial plan and I raise to 200. Not much time goes by before the opponent announces a call. I'd love to see it blank on the river. We get one. The dealer puts out the 7 of spades. We should still have the best hand. Under the gun checks. I'm going to continue betting for value. I make it 400. It'd be great if the opponent had trip jacks or at least a king. 45 seconds goes by, then the player folds. Someone else at the table would ask him if he had king queen, and he said that he had worse than that. Maybe he had king 10 and was counterfeited. It seemed more likely to me by the way that he responded that he had a hand like queen 10 or worse. We win a nice pot. Several orbits later, we've got ace queen offsuit on the button. Under the gun +1 raises to 30. No need to 3-bet over an early position raise. I call. Small blind calls. The big blind also calls. We're going 4 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out king 10-4 with 2 hearts. We've got a gutter, 1 over, and a backdoor flush draw. It checks to me. I want to make sure that I'm able to realize some of my hand's value and potential. I check back to avoid getting raised. It's tough to get bluffs through 3 opponents anyway. The turn is the 9 of spades. Small blind and big blind check. They're almost never going to have anything strong because they can't allow people behind them to see free cards, and there's no reason to think that either the initial preflop raiser or I will take a stab at it after checking previously. Under the gun +1 happens to take a stab at it. He might be thinking along the same lines as me that the other 2 players will probably fold, so he only has to get through me. I might actually have him beat. If not, I've got a draw to the nuts, and I can rep the ace-high flush if another heart comes on the river. I call. If either the small blind or the big blind have second pair or worse, they won't be able to overcall. They'll have to fold plenty of better hands than what I've got. The small blind pulls a Richard Nixon and quits. The big blind may recognize what's going on, that under the gun +1 and I could both be weak. He puts in the check raise to 210. This makes 0 sense to me. I've been check raised 4 times today. This is the second time that it checked through on the flop, and an opponent went for the check raise on the turn. You probably remember the first time we were getting bluffed, and we punished the opponent for it. This has a very similar feel. Under the gun +1 folds. It's on me. The previous time the guy check raised bluffed the turn, I at least had some showdown value with a pair of 10s, so I was able to call him down. Here I've only got ace high, so I don't want to call. I might actually have the best hand, so I don't want to fold either. I also have good card removal, making it less likely that I'm going to be up against a straight. Plus, absolute worst case scenario, I have a draw to the nuts to bail me out. The big blind has about 1100 more. I'm going to see if he wants to play for all of it.
All in.
The big blind immediately folds. He had nothing or close to it, just like I thought. My line didn't make any sense, and I actually could have had the best hand, but 3-bet bluffing seemed like a better option to accomplish my goal of winning immediately without having to improve. Plan B was to drill the straight if I had gotten called. That was a really unique situation in which the big blind recognized that I'll frequently be weak, and I re-recognized that that would be the case for him as well before ripping it in his face. Late in the session, we've got ace queen offsuit in the cutoff. It's a straddle pot. The player in middle position limps in for 10. I raise to 50. The under the gun straddler calls. He's played by far the most snug out of anyone here. The middle position player also calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It's queen 3 deuce rainbow. It's check to us. We're going for value. I bet 65 to target worse queens and middling pocket pairs. Under the gun calls. This is a little worrisome given his tight nature. The middle position player folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the 7 of diamonds. Under the gun wants control of the pot. He leads for 125. He's repping at least a queen. Perhaps he has a set or something like queen 3 or queen 7 suited. I'm very suspicious that I'm beat, but I'm close to the top of my range and I can't fold. I call. It's another big pot that we're involved in. The river is the 8 of hearts. That shouldn't change anything. It certainly doesn't scare the opponent. He increases his bet size to 325. I've been playing for 9 hours. If I call here and I'm wrong, I'm going to be stuck again. If I fold, I can walk away with a small profit and then head to the bar on property where Andrew and a handful of others have already gone to have drinks and hang out. This particular opponent is probably never bluffing. One more time, I convince myself that the player's line is odd and I've got too good of a hand to part with.
Can't fold. Nice hand. Oh, wow. I'm sorry.
Somehow the opponent has ace-10 offsuit and took a very obscure line with intentions of getting me. This is a prime example of why you see me make calls that would otherwise be suspect. People regularly go out of their way to make strange plays against me. This call allows us to win almost an extra $1,000. We lost $600 calling light on the river earlier, and then an additional $100 with ace king, but we still net a few hundred in profit with river calls in spots where we're likely beat this session. Here we've got ace queen offsuit under the gun +2. It's a straddle pot. I raised it 35. The cutoff calls. She was one of the opponents in the last hand who couldn't beat me. She's not happy to have missed out on an opportunity to get some Bradley dollars. To get a visualization, she's a bit on the older side, and she's become one very angry Russian woman. The big blind calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It's jack 5-5 rainbow. The big blind checks. I check. The cutoff bet's 40. Not a very large amount. The big blind calls. I'm getting a good price. I call. I've got a backdoor straight draw, and I can always hit a queen or an ace or a queen. We've got a lot more showdown value with that turn. The big blind checks. I check. The cutoff bet's 160. There's a much larger sizing than we saw previously. For her to be firing again after getting called by 2 opponents, she's saying that she has a hand at least as good as king queen and more like queen jack or trip 5s. The big blind folds. I didn't float on the previous street to make a hand and give up. I call. It's down to 2 of us. The river is a 10. I check. It's possible that I'm up against trips, maybe even a straight if the opponent was bluffing on the flop with king 9 or 9-8 and got there on the river. She fires for 325. She's certainly representing a better hand than I have. This is kind of a similar spot as that one when we were facing a river bet in the bomb pot with queen 9. I don't feel like I'm good, but I also feel obligated to call because I'm getting okay odds. People are always out to get me, so you just never know what they're going to show up with. In general, it's not good to be calling river bets. It's just not in me to lay it down.
All right, they can't fold.
I call. I'm very happy to see that the opponent has jack 10 offsuit. She has 2 pair, but our 2 pair is better since we have queens and 5s.
Yeah, that'd be. Thank you.
It's another big pot that we win. We're running great and are currently winning over 2,000 on the night. After adding on again, I pick up ace queen offsuit in the small blind. The hijack cutoff and button all limp in. I've got too good of a hand to allow this type of shenanigans to go on. I raised to 70. I'd like to either win with no flop or narrow it down to 1 opponent. The hijack cutoff and button call for 60 more. None of them wanted to raise, yet they're all fine with calling 70. I admire their tenacity. The flop comes king jack 8 rainbow. We have a gutter with 1 over. More importantly, this should be a much better flop for my range as the pre-flop aggressor than it is for the murderer's row limp callers. Typically, it's not a great idea to be bluffing into multiple opponents. Stuck me, feels okay about it in this situation though. I bet 170. That's too much for the hijack. He folds, cutoff may have a piece of the board. He calls, the button folds, it's heads up. I've got a card in mind that I'd like to hit. The visualization techniques that I've been practicing day and night for years pay off huge as the dealer puts out the 10 of hearts on the turn. We have the absolute nuts. I bet 400. The cutoff doesn't seem to have much of a hand after all. He crushes my dreams of stacking him, and he folds. Still a nice sized pot that we win after tumultuous several hours of play. Drilling a gutter has me feeling rejuvenated. I'm pumped and ready to recover the rest of the missing Bradley dollars. Next, it's our turn for ace queen. We're under the gun +1. I raised to 60. There are quite a few interested customers. The button calls, who was the opponent in the last hand. He's out for revenge. The big blind calls, and the under the gun straddler calls as well. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes queen 3 deuce rainbow. We've got top and a backdoor straight draw. Still, there are lots of other players in the hand. It checks to us. We're going to be firing for value and to clear out the field. I bet 140. Maybe we'll win right now, or maybe we'll get 1 caller. I don't anticipate much more action than that. I'm very wrong. No one folds. The 3 opponents all call. I'm not even sure what to put everyone on. I imagine 1 player has a queen and the rest either have straight draws or are slow playing sets. The turn is another deuce, which I'm glad to see because it reduces the amount of set combos that we could have been up against, and there shouldn't be many deuces in my opponent's range, if any. It checks to me. I check for pot control purposes and to see how players will proceed going forward. The button checks back. I'm no longer concerned. He's going to have us beat. If nothing changes on the river, I'll only have to be worried about the big blind and the under the gun straddler. The dealer puts out the 4 of clubs. Pocket 4s make a boat. 6-5 and ace-5 also get there. The big blind bets 225. It's a tiny sizing that I take at face value. It looks like he has a medium strength hand like a bad queen and is trying to get to showdown as cheaply as possible. Under the gun folds. We won't be folding. We didn't put in the raise on the river in the previous hand that we went over, but we're putting one in here. I make it 600 to go. This is for pure value to get a hand like king queen or queen jack to call. The button folds. The action's on the big blind. He's got our number. It's 600, but he's not going to call us maybe. He re-raises to 1600. What on earth is going on here? They say if you get check raised on the river, you should almost always fold because you're pretty much just going to be up against the nuts. If you get 3-bet on the river, it's even more likely. I'm replaying the hand in my mind. I was so sure that the small river bet was a blocker. Now I'm wondering if he was trying to induce a raise with a hand like quad deuces or 3 or 4s full. I don't think that we'd get re-raised by a straight, so I'm ruling that hand out, especially because we have removal to ace-5. The opponent will never have queens full, and actually should be concerned that we could have that hand because occasionally I might check turn with pocket queens, figuring that we'd be up against a lot of straight draws that wouldn't be able to call a turn bet, but may bluff river if they don't get there. I'm confused, but I go with my initial read that the opponent bets small with a medium strength hand and may now be attempting some kind of Hail Mary bluff. I call for 1,000 more, and we hear one of my favorite things. The opponent turned queen 10 offsuit into an odd bluff and takes himself straight to value town. Our assessment of the situation is correct, that the big blind bet small on the river to get to showdown cheaply, then for some reason decided to charge himself the maximum to get to showdown. We win a big pot even for the stakes that we're playing tonight. Our stack climbs to almost 8,000. Next we've got ace queen offsuit and under the gun straddle. Our opponent from the last hand raises to 200. The button calls. The initial preflop raiser has been open limping in other pots previously. The fact that he's raising and using a big sizing is alarming. I call for 160 more to close the action. The flop comes jack 10-5 rainbow. We've got a gutter with 2 overs. I check. The middle position player fires for 300 without skipping a beat. When people act this quickly, it seems suspicious. The button folds. We're relatively strong and we have a draw to the nuts. I call. We're off to the turn. The dealer puts out another jack. There are 2 hearts on the board. I check. We face another lightning fast bet of 400. We're getting 4-1, but we could be drawing dead. Something just feels off to me. The opponent is mostly representing trips or better, and it's tough to believe that story. Folding is still probably the best option. I'm just not able to do it. I call a small bet, not knowing what card I'll want to hit. Typically, you want to avoid putting yourself in these kind of situations. The river is the ace of hearts giving us top pair. I have mixed feelings with the backdoor flush draw getting there, some straight draws getting there, and ace king and ace jack type of hands still have us beat. I check. The opponent is acting much slower on this street. If he bets big, I'll probably have to fold even after getting a card that improves our hand. Instead, he checks back. We turn over the ace queen. The opponent takes his time to process whether or not we beat him. Maybe he has ace 10 or something and isn't sure if the queen kicker plays. After what seems like forever, the middle position player finally returns his cards face down to the dealer. I probably got lucky on the river to beat pocket kings, pocket queens, or ace 10. It's also possible that the opponent had some random holding that we were ahead of the entire way because I wouldn't have expected him to bet the turn for value that often without trips, and he obviously didn't have that. Either way, we win a $2,000 pot that gets us closer to the even mark. We're really only 1 medium pot away. Very next hand, we've got ace queen offsuit in the cutoff. I raise a 10. The button is named Mark. He's been proposing that we take an unorthodox picture together in which we both make a funny face. I'm always happy to take photos, but I have mixed feelings on this particular idea. Mark 3 bets at 30. There aren't a ton of light 3 bets in small stakes games. I call for 20 more to see a flop. We're heads up out of position. It comes 7-5 deuce with 2 spades and a diamond. We don't smash it, but we've got some potential with 2 overs and some backdoor draws. If another spade comes, we can turn our hand into a bluff, representing the nuts that we'd have removal for. I check. The button puts out a small bet of 20. That's exactly how much I was hoping it'd be. I call. We move on to the turn. It's the 9 of diamonds, putting another flush draw on the board. I check. The opponent keeps the pressure on. He bets 70. The question is, should we chuck? Nah, blockers keep me excited to remain in so that we can turn our hand into a bluff and make an extremely subtle Chuck Knobloch reference for the viewers who are also fans of baseball in the 90s. The river is the king of spades. We drill our fake money card. The opponent has about 400 left in his stack. I've made some large value bets on rivers at this table already, including some all-ins, and I've shown credibility's at an all-time high. We've got removal to the nuts. All systems are go to blast off. I overbet jam to see if the opponent wants to risk his stack with something less than the best possible hand. Knowing that the ace and king of spades are both accounted for after the opponent 3-bet preflop, it's incredibly unlikely that we're up against a non-fictional flush as opposed to our fictional flush. The opponent is going to have to dig deep to find a hero call. Ideally, he has some kind of high pocket pair like queens or jacks that was just downgraded to second pair, which would make it even tougher for him to stay around. After a full minute of thinking, the button folds. I can't help but show that we cashed in on our image to get the bluff through. The opponent says he had pocket tens. I wouldn't recommend taking my line. It's simpler to fold on the turn without referencing a former Rookie of the Year, but it's certainly fun when everything works out according to plan. Now the idea of taking a picture with the button while making a funny face is a little more appealing, and I do it. We're only down 150. In the final hand that we'll go over, we're in middle position. Steve, who's the tightest player at the table, opens the 30 from early position with pocket jacks. The action's on me. I 3-bet to 100 with ace-queen offsuit. This 3-bet should get a lot of respect from the other players since I'm 3-betting a tight player and there are still 5 players left to act behind me. I can't get through one person though. Andrew makes a call on my immediate left. This sets off some alarm bells. He's going to have a very narrow range consisting of high pairs and ace-king and ace-queen type of hands. Nat calls with 8-7 off, which I'm really surprised about, but he was stuck a lot and probably just wants to get in the mix. Folds back to Steve. He flats for 70 more, so we go 4 ways to the flop, and it's ace-queen jack with 2 diamonds. We flop top 2, but we're way behind Steve's set of jacks. I'm happy to have flopped 2 pair, but this flop is going to crush my opponent's ranges. 2 people cold called my 3-bet, and the tightest player opened and then called my 3-bet from early position. I put Andrew and Steve on similar ranges of ace-king, ace-queen, pocket tens, jacks, and queens. Of those hands, I'm only beating pocket tens and ace-king. Ace-king is the only hand out of those that could reasonably call a bet. I put Nat on a slightly wider range. He could reasonably have me beat as well though. Steve checks his set. I have to bet, but honestly I don't love the situation given the action so far. I bet 175. Looks very strong. Andrew and Nat fold their hands and Steve just calls with his set. This is super interesting because I thought if he had 2 pair or a set, there's a good chance he'd raise me since there are potentially so many bad cards for him. He's not going to want to see an ace, king, queen, or 10 on the turn. The turn is a dream card for me and one of those nightmare cards for Steve. It's another ace, giving me the best possible hand. Steve checks. I go with a small bet of 225. If he has ace-king, then he'll have to stick around and he's going to be drawing dead to only 3 outs. If he has any other full house, it might look to him like I have ace-king and he could potentially raise. Steve again just flats, so it really seems like he has ace-king. There are 4 possible combinations of ace-king and only 3 possible combinations of pocket jacks, so for that reason, it's more likely as well. If Steve had pocket queens, I almost definitely would have gotten raised on the flop, and there's only 1 possible combination of that hand, so I can pretty safely rule it out. The river is a complete blank. It's the 7 of spades. Steve checks for a 3rd time. Since he chose not to raise my flop or turn bets, it's pretty clear he's worried that he might not have the best hand. He has 1100 left in his stack and the pot's 1200. I need to decide how much I can bet that will get called by a hand like ace-king or possibly bottom full house. I don't think an all-in will be the most profitable. I choose to go with 700. Steve snap calls and shows up with the best hand I think he'll ever show up with given his line. I feel like I played it well. Let's see what the commentators think.
I don't know how Brad doesn't shove there. Did you? I mean, if our opponent has ace-king and they're going to call 700, they're probably going to call off the 1100 as well.
True. Like if somebody's calling 700, they're calling
off all of it. I mean,
plus your shove there looks more bluffy.
Okay, so I disagree with the commentators that if he's calling 700 with ace-king, then he's also calling 1100. That's a bet of almost 60% more, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other commentator then says that if I shove, it looks more bluffy too, so that's another benefit. Okay, let's look back at this hand one more time. The tightest player at the table opens from early position, and I 3-bet in middle position. I'm almost never 3-betting a tight player's early position raise light when I'm in middle position. Also, I get cold called in 2 spots, and then the tight player calls as well. A high connected flop comes out, and I bet into 3 players who all have ranges that theoretically should crush this flop. Once again, I'm just never ever having any bluffs in my range given my line, who my opponents are, and the position I'm in. The turn pairs the board, it's heads up against the tight player, and I fire a 2nd bullet and get called. The river comes out, now I'm going to fire a 3rd bullet. I wouldn't even fire 3 streets with ace-king in this spot. Almost 100% of the time, I'm going to have a full house, and when I don't, it's because I have quad aces. My opponent's a thinking player. He should realize that no matter what I bet on the river, it's going to be with a monster hand. If I shove, he's good enough to know that ace king certainly is never good, and pocket jacks are never going to be good either. I choose a sizing of 700 to target ace king because I think that's by far the most probable hand that he has given the action. He doesn't raise me with a set on the flop, and he doesn't raise me when he made a boat on the turn. He was clearly worried that I had him beat, which is an even better reason for me not to shove river, because then he could have gotten away from bottom full house, and if that ever happens, it would be an absolute disaster. He actually came up to me later and said that if I shoved, then he would have folded. Now he did snap call the 700, so I probably could have gotten a little more value, but his hand was a lot stronger than I thought. I can only make decisions based on the information that I have at the time, so I was actually very happy with how I played the hand and surprised that I didn't get raised at any point when I found out what he actually had. I did get 1200 of the 1600 Steve started the hand with, so I feel pretty good. That was the last interesting hand of the stream. I got very lucky to hit a 4-outer, but Johnny ended up being the big winner. He crushed it and profited around 6,500. I came out as the second biggest winner. I bought in for 1,000 and cashed out for just over 3,000.